Hey, welcome back to Business 150, Introduction to Management. We're looking at Module 6, the topic of planning and strategy. And we've been talking about goals and implementing plans. And now in our fifth video, we're looking at the topic of strategy. Business strategy. What is business strategy? How does it intersect with planning? And what are we to make of this very important function? Well, we hope that after this video, you'll be able to define strategy and strategic management and describe the general steps involved in strategic management. So let's dive right in. We start out this discussion on strategy with a very, very old problem. In fact, this is a very, very old problem that might have resulted in all of us speaking French. That's right. There's a reason why we speak English, and generally it's because of the Battle of Trafalgar, a naval battle dating back several hundred years, celebrating the English Admiral, Admiral Horatio Nelson. You may have heard that name before, Horatio Nelson, and this is the battle that he made him the most famous, the Battle of Trafalgar. What was the Battle of Trafalgar? Well, the Battle of Trafalgar was, under Napoleon, the French army and the Spanish army, their navies at least, had united together and were set to invade and conquer England. And the only thing that really stood in the way of Napoleon and the United Kingdom was the British fleet. The British fleet, which was at this particular battle at Trafalgar, outnumbered and outgunned by the combined fleet of the French and Spanish Navy, operating at a disadvantage, both numerically and with firepower, and yet the English had one asset, which was the brilliant naval commander, Admiral Horatio Nelson. Admiral Nelson surveyed and analyzed his strengths as well as the strengths of the opposing force. What did the English have going for them? They had more experienced captains and more experienced sailors. What did the French and Spanish have going for them? More boats, better armed boats, larger boats with more cannons. But on the day of the battle, what else did Admiral Nelson have going for the British fleet? Choppy water because of inclement windy weather. What does this mean? It means that because during this time of naval battles, sailing vessels would typically line up and run parallel to each other because the boats all shot from the side, Admiral Nelson realized that under choppy water, with the boats going up and down because of waves and disquiet in the seas, that experienced sailors and experienced captains have a very, very large advantage over inexperienced captains with inexperienced crews, no matter how many guns that the opposing side might have. And so, as you can see on the slide, Admiral Nelson developed a novel strategy that had never been used before in naval battle. Rather than having his navy line up in a line parallel to the French and Spanish fleets, you see that illustrated, the French and Spanish illustrated in blue and black, and the English fleet illustrated in the red there. What he did was he divided his fleet into two lines of boats and decided to approach the French and Spanish in a perpendicular fashion rather than parallel. What did that end up doing? Well, one, they had the element of surprise because the French and Spanish had never dealt with an enemy, a foe, approaching them in a perpendicular fashion. And so they weren't quite sure what to do. But then also because the waves were choppy, it meant that the French and Spanish sailors were very, very poorly able to deal with aiming their guns to be able to compensate for the choppy seas. As a result, the two French parallel lines divided the French and Spanish fleet into three sections, and the English had their way. At the end of the battle, the French and Spanish fleets had lost 2/3 of their boats, sunk, damaged, gone. The English, on the other hand, lost 0 boats. And what do you see there? Then the triumph of novel, new, unique strategy after analyzing where you are strong and where the opponent is weak. And quite frankly, in a very literal sense, we have Admiral Nelson to thank for the fact that the British didn't end up being conquered and therefore speaking French, and therefore here in the United States, we didn't end up speaking French or Spanish as our native language. This is what strategy is about. Strategy is about analyzing where you are strong, where you may be weak, where the enemy is weak and where it may be strong, and making your plans appropriately to exploit your strengths and to avoid your weaknesses. What is strategy then? A course of action for implementing strategic plans and achieving strategic goals. Therefore, strategic management consists of everything the organization undertakes to develop and execute its strategic plan. And a strategy, therefore, must have at least 4 components: a scope, a plan for resource deployment, exploitation of synergy, we'll explain that in just a moment, as well as leveraging one's distinctive competence. And we'll talk about that as well. So, when we talk about the consideration of scope, what are we talking about? Well, in business, who are you serving? Who is your market? How broad or narrow is your targeting? And so before you can really get out of the gates, you have to be able to define not only who are you serving, but also, by definition, who are you not serving? Who really are you not focusing on? Now, you'd be pleased if they purchased your product or service, but they're really not who you're targeting. Who are you most specifically targeting? That's the first question. The second question, where will you be putting your resources to work? In what ways will you be putting your resources to work? Where will you need to invest time and effort and capital, as well as your people, in order to make the very best of the situation? Number 3, what is synergy? Synergy is not simply that 1 + 1 = 2. And quite frankly, it's not even that 1 + 1 = 3. It's that 1 + 1 = 780 or more. In other words, how is it that your organization might be uniquely built that when your divisions, departments, your people start cooperating and working together, you get exponentially greater results than simply them working alone? This necessitates that you really understand how your company works, historically, where have they hit home runs, where do they really excel, and seeing how you can leverage and exploit those strengths. This, at the end of the day, results in what we call in strategy a distinctive competence, which is really the answer to the question, what do you do better than anyone else? Anyone else in your industry, what do you do uniquely better? And if you do something uniquely better than anyone else in your industry, can you sustain, prolong, and defend your advantage from others? Why do you have to sustain, prolong, and defend your advantage from others? Because if you do something better than anyone else, others will want to copy you. Will they be able to successfully not only copy you, but overtake you? Or do you have a natural advantage of some sort that simply cannot be overcome by the efforts of copycats? This is really what the question of distinctive competence that leads to competitive advantage, all these kinds of terms you may have heard about. This is really what we're talking about. What do you do better than anyone else, and can you sustain that advantage? Now, one way to articulate strategy that we often teach to startup founders and entrepreneurs is to distill what you are seeking to accomplish into one sentence. Here, by the way, is the basic framework for the one-sentence pitch. My company, insert company name, is developing, well, what do you do? What's your defined offering? To help a defined audience, who are you targeting, and to help them solve, insert huge, painful, recurring problem they currently experience, with some level of your secret sauce. What do you do? Who is your company? What do you do? Who are you helping to solve what problem? And how do you do that uniquely, differently, and betterly than anybody else in the industry? This is the one-sentence pitch, the framework for being able to articulate how you do what you do. Now, here's the thing. If you are not able to articulate this to someone else, quite frankly, you're probably not able to articulate this to yourself. You have to be able to distill what you do to help what defined audience solve what huge problem with what particular secret sauce, and able to best understand what is your strategy and how are you going to arrive at where you want to go. I hope you understand why this is such a powerful tool. This, by the way, is not in the textbook. This simply comes from our practice of consulting with founders for startups and helping them to refine their pitch to investors, venture capitalists, pitch adjudicators, those kinds of things. The strategic management process then is, you see it here in 4 steps. First, identify your mission and your strategic goals. Second, conduct your SWOT analysis, which we've talked about and we'll continue to talk about here in a later lecture. What is SWOT analysis? Identifying your company's strengths and weaknesses and identifying opportunities and threats that it faces in the external marketplace, in the external environment. After you've done your analysis, number 3, formulate your strategy to capitalize on its greatest strengths and to keep its organizational weaknesses from being exploited by competitors or other factors in the environment. And only then, once we have that all together, do we get around to implementing, evaluating, and controlling the strategic plan. This then is the strategic management process that we continue to iterate and analyze, learn from our reflection of what went right and what went wrong, and continue to adjust and reiterate our strategic management process. You can see here then the illustration from the textbook, right? Figure 6.3 from chapter 6 of your text. It begins with mission and goal identification. It then gets to SWOT analysis, analyzing you and the outside environment. We begin then to formulate strategy and come up with the plan, and then we implement, execute, and evaluate the results in order to then exercise our strategic control on the next step, which is to reiterate this entire process. How do we adjust and do even better the next time? So we hope in this very brief video that as you study the textbook, you can see the rationale, the reasonableness of this proposition, that as we seek to understand who are we in the marketplace and what do we do well, what do we do in fact better than anyone else, that will be the seeds, the start of our analysis to define strategy and strategic management, and also that now you know how to describe the steps involved in the iterative strategic management process. Hope that's helpful. More on this, of course, in the textbook. You'll want to take a look at that and study this well. This can be very, very important, not only in taking this class, but more importantly, in your career and your advance as a strategic manager. Hope that's helpful. We'll see you in the next lecture.